to uh, engage in conversations abroad, right, and influence foreign governments abroad and entities abroad. Were pretending it was the gravest sin in the world when it was done here. We're targeting Americans, and it looks like they were playing part of that same game, and using that as a basis to censor Americans based on that theory. The Russians were out to engage Americans and they needed to be suppressed. And if that meant suppressing Americans, so be it. Protect democracy.
Pretty much. And beyond, they have this thing, where they have a mission creep, right? First, it was stopping foreign election influence, which, as we all know, is based on a lie. It's based on the big lie in 2016. And they used that to expand the scope to cover pretty much everything. Right now, it's about promoting this war in Ukraine, spending American tax dollars. I mean, you just had Mitch McConnell come out and say, "Oh, we're going to be the party of giving Ukraine money." Like, what the hell? Like, it's a uniparty effort here, right? And man, Mitch needs to go.
Tom, you just said something that I haven't heard before, and it reminded me of this. It's like, listen, guys, we're going to come in, we're the US government, we're going to come in, we're going to take your rights away. But listen, it's because we don't want the Russians to come and suppress your rights. Just understand that what we're doing is so that they can't come do it to you, okay? But we're the government, we can do it. It's so ridiculous.
It's absolutely absurd.
And it continues. I think one of the big issues that I think is going to be next up is, or I would hope is next up, there are the COVID documents, the COVID files out of the Twitter files, because that's where there's truly a massive interaction. I know, I'm kind of going on memory here, but I'm sure folks can pull it up if they Google it. That we had uncovered documents where the money actually was flowing into the government. They were providing free public service announcements. I guess that's the most charitable way of putting it. Facebook and some of these other social media companies to HHS to push whatever propaganda efforts they needed to be pushed on COVID. And so I think the interactions you're going to find. I mean, if you think that they were acting as an outlet of the FBI, I mean, you know, I bet you had HHS people working in these offices in the big tech platforms. I don't know how much closer it could have gotten given the ban hammer that was coming down on so many accounts for daring to speak anything outside of approved opinion on the COVID fights.
Yeah. Hey, Tom, I've been following you for years. You're clearly a bright lawyer. I've seen,
I'm not a lawyer. Warning.
Okay. Well, your organization probably employs a couple of lawyers, right?
We do. We do.
Yeah. So, I've been following a lot of the cases that you brought, a lot of the results that you get, FOIA requests that turned out, very important information. When you look at all of these Twitter file releases, isn't this a gold mine for you and your organization? I mean, you have so much to work with now to go and take this evidence and ask, the government or subpoena or take legal action with FOIA requests to get information from the other side. Right? What we are seeing now is what Twitter's releasing, right? So can't you just go and bring a case against the FBI and say, hey, you have to disclose to us all of your discussions that you had with Google, with Facebook, with all of these other big tech companies? Like, how can you use what we have now to inflict more pain on the government for having done this?
Well, I mean, you highlight exactly what can be done with the records under the Freedom of Information Act, which is a federal law here. You file a request with the agency and you ask for the records, and they have generally, 20 days to 30 days, depending administratively how it goes, to respond. And they either have to give you the documents, or give you an update as to what they're doing. And if they don't respond adequately, you can go to court. And so as these files are being released, you can be sure that, Judicial Watch, and I'm sure we're not the only ones looking at it because there's some others who are doing this work as well, are kind of walking, what do they call it? Walking back the cat, right? To the agencies to get the mirror of these types of discussions and documents at the FBI and DHS. And I know just recently we sued, I think it was the Department of Homeland Security for their, remember a few months for government entities to go to the social media platforms to get folks taken down. So we asked for the records, we were given the hand to the face, and we sued. So you can expect more of this. But what's also interesting about this, Kim, is that and everyone else, is that when FBI colludes against you, or anyone listening, and your account is harmed or something like that, there are potential litigation opportunities for folks and civil rights cases and things of that nature. I mean, we in California,
go ahead.
There was a case we had found that the California Secretary of State's office was doing everything we were worried about, working with the Biden campaign PR firm to try to find, quote, disinformation, and then go to these companies and get stuff taken down. And they did that with DC Drano on Twitter, and I know he's sued separately with Harmeet Dillon. They did that with Judicial Watch. We found those documents. So we found all of that, what they did to DC Drano and to Judicial Watch. They caused the Judicial Watch video to be taken down about election issues. So we just sued the California Secretary of State's office over that civil rights violation that I was describing. So there's going to be a lot of litigation. Of course, we have that Missouri case that's proceeding in I call it the Missouri case, but there's a group of states suing to get access to information, and Fauci's had to suing over this suppression and censorship operation related to COVID. Fauci's had to testify, and others have testified as well. So, there's a lot that can be done outside of Congress, because Congress is just going to be frustrated no matter what it does, even if it's good, it's going to be frustrating.
So let me ask you something else, because Twitter, when Elon bought it, surely has not disclosed any of this prior to the purchase, because he could have used that in his court case where he wanted to back out of the deal. Now that he has all this information, he said he didn't just buy a company, he bought a crime scene. If you put your legal hat on, what do you think are the options that Elon has now? Because, I mean, there's multiple, I would say, criminal conspiracies going on. There's definitely a lot of stuff going on that has decreased the value of Twitter significantly, especially for Twitter to allow government bots to operate on Twitter and create a negative user experience. All of this shadow banning, I'm sure they would not have disclosed to Elon before he bought the company. That has cost millions and millions of accounts leaving Twitter to go to other platforms like Parler, Truth Social, you name it. So the damage is huge. And he basically bought this wasp nest of problems. What do you think he can do to pursue the previous shareholders or the company or the board to get his money back?
I think that's probably something he's asking his lawyers now. One of the things that's so extraordinary about what he's doing, as someone who's been involved in doing watchdog work for 30 almost 25, I guess it's 25 years now, you see a company kind of admitting to wrongdoing in these documents, and there's certain liabilities that potentially come from that, either from the prior, for, as you're suggesting, the prior management, or I don't know if it is, does he kind of take on those liabilities as the new owner? I don't know enough about corporate law to know how that might work. I mean, when you have, for instance, I know specifically there was a Federal Election Commission complaint. For those of you listening from outside of the United States, it's the federal entity that monitors campaign finance law compliance issues. And there was a complaint filed against Twitter, alleging illegal coordination, illicit coordination, or in-kind contributions to the Democrats in the Biden campaign. I may have the specifics wrong, but generally there was a fight about Twitter was up to no good working for the Democrats. And they denied any collusion. Well, now those documents that have come out in Twitter files number, I think it was 4, it was near the first batch, right? 1 or 2, show immediately that there was collusion with the Democrats and the Biden campaign to take down content.
Yeah.
And there was no similar collusion with the Trump people. Nothing like that.
Yeah. And what happened at the Senate hearing, Jack lied under oath, telling, answering questions about shadow banning and saying that never happened. And the crazy thing is his general counsel was sitting right behind him. You can see it in the video. And she had knowledge of it, which we now know from the Twitter files that have been released. And she didn't step in. So even if Jack is claiming that he had no idea, the moment he said something that is clearly wrong, and she had knowledge of that, as general counsel, she would have had to step in and correct that. And she didn't do that. So I think they both knew exactly what is happening at Twitter, and they lied. They decided to lie to the U.S. Senate.
Yeah, Ian, I mean, you've heard a lot of Musk's other spaces that I may not have heard on. Has he kind of addressed this issue about the prior misconduct of management directly?
I think he's only mentioned it on Twitter itself. I don't believe that he actually addressed it in any of the spaces. I mean, the questions that we posed to him were not necessarily related to these things. Although he said that, okay, so when we asked him what his opinion was, he said that he only knows about as much as we do, right? He is not getting, his time at Twitter is to focus on the engineering, and he hasn't read through the files personally. So he's waiting for these journalists to comb through all these files, and there's a lot of them. It's raw data, so it's very difficult to, just look at it and say, oh, here's what's happening. They have to actually cross-reference a lot of stuff. That's the reason why you notice this a few times. I think Li Fang even mentioned it today, that he had to interview a bunch of people who either currently work at Twitter or worked at Twitter to ask them to confirm certain information or ask them to provide all of these details. So the journalists are actually doing journalistic work. They're not just sifting through files, they're actually interviewing people.
So just to give you an update based on this spacesdashboard.com, we're the number one Spaces again on Twitter. It's about 5,500 listeners. Now, Kim, I think when you had the shutdown, it was well over 6,000. So, do you think there was a technical issue with a capacity issue, simply given that we're 5 times the size of the next biggest Spaces, or do you really think it was an intervention here?
Well, we know it was an intervention because we had 2 other hosts prior to myself. So we had Mario Naval host the space, and he had the same issues. Then it was Tara hosting the space. That's when the host mute started. So she got always muted, and people who were speaking were kicked off. And then I said, okay, let me run it. And then the same thing happened there. But then there was like a window of 30 to 45 minutes where it was running smooth. And then it went back to being bad. So let's see how long this one is going to work. And then what we also did, we sent people from our spaces to other spaces. And what happened there is they confirmed there are no issues in any other spaces. And when you go to the website spacesdashboard.com, you can see many other spaces that are live now that are 3 hours, 2 hours, 5 hours, 4 hours running. And obviously they have no issues. Otherwise they wouldn't still be running. And they have, some of them have thousands of people in them. So it's pretty obvious that the Twitter files topic has been targeted. This space specifically about this topic has been targeted.
So I was thinking about the Elon Musk scenario and the whole polling issue, and we've had you had a prior discussion before you kind of got shut down about him restricting the polling to blue check marks. I see Elon Musk was in a bad way after the attack on his family, the failure, the kind of the joint operation by the media. It looked like to me to dox him and then to attack him when he went to try to enforce some civility on the platform that would have protected him and others from that abusive tactic. And he was looking for reassurance, and he didn't get it. And I saw his silence in response to the poll as something, not positive. But Kim, I think you probably saved him and threw him a lifeline by, explaining that the poll was probably not as scientific, even in a Twitter world, as it could have otherwise have been. And he's kind of been reinvigorated and seems a little bit more active and willing to participate and continue fighting. Is that a fair reading of where we are or where we've been and where we're going?
I mean, to me, it was pretty obvious that the poll result was skewed. It made no sense. And also, when you look at the likes to vote ratio from his previous polls and you compare it with this one, there was clearly bot activity because the likes didn't match, what he had in other polls in the past. So, and it was also pretty clear to me that he went into this poll with some confidence that Twitter had killed quite a few bots, but what they were targeting were spam bots. They are not the ones that are run by the government, that are used for propaganda campaigns. So those are much harder to identify and to remove, and they have clearly shown up in force to create this result. This was an attack against Elon because he's now the, let's be frank, number one enemy of the deep state releasing all of this information.
Ian, what do you think?
I'm in complete agreement. I do think that they're going after Elon Musk right now from various different angles. They're not just attacking him in one way. It's like Senator Warren is also launching an attack on him by going after his investors. Like, who's ever heard of this, right? Like, look at the attacks that he's receiving right now. It's not just, some leftists on Twitter who are mad at him. It's the media, it's the politicians, and it's not just the US government. There are, a lot of Europeans who don't like what he's doing because his free speech policies actually go against some of the laws that they're trying to pass in the European Union. And so those people are upset with him, trying to threaten him with sanctions. I mean, I'm not sure if you guys saw the other day, but one of the leaders of the the European Union threatened him with sanctions. She was like, soon, sanctions. It's like not even a threat of a sanction, but promising that sanctions would follow if he was, enforcing the rules on Twitter, which is absolutely absurd. Never heard of that before.
Yeah, we focus one type or the other, threaten Musk, most recently over his removal of journalists who knowingly or should have knowingly, or they either knew or should have known they were doxing him when they sent people to a specific site which had his private plane location data. And, so this is kind of a world. The left is not, it's notoriously transnational, and there's a way of thinking about free speech that is alien, that has been rejected by the transnational left in the United States and in Europe, and it's resulting in this severe and significant pushback against Musk for not bringing in free speech on Twitter, but freer speech. So it isn't like a free for all, that's for sure. And he's highlighted how slurs are much less likely to be seen on Twitter than previously.
And yet, in spite of all the things he's done, right, reducing hate speech, or you can argue that hate speech is not really a legal term, but by removing nasty slurs and harassing messages You don't see them quite as often, and it's true you don't. Uh, they're still attacking him. They use some false number, and who knows how they got this number. The Center for Countering Digital Hate in the UK claims that hate speech has gone up by 300% against black people. It's like, based on what? What are you tracking? Like, how are you getting these numbers when Twitter itself shows that uh, the, the people typing out these words are not even being elevated? The people are just not typing it out. And Elon, when he was in our space, one of our spaces, he said that there was a small group of people actually responsible for all of the hate speech that they saw in that particular week, right? They've all been banned, but they were all tweeting out nasty, nasty things. It's something like a couple of hundred accounts that are responsible for over 300 tweets that were, just the word, the K word, the N word, and so on. So this idea that he's not doing anything to address hate speech on Twitter is absolutely false.
Yeah, I mean, I would say those people in the US, the UK who participated in that poll, maybe I'd say hashtag voter bias, perhaps. But yeah, this is the thing. I've gotten so many DMs, that, oh, he's a hypocrite, this, that, he doesn't believe in freedom of speech. And I say the same thing, and I just want to say it one time here. To all those people who think that, you don't know the Constitution. You don't know the Constitution. The Constitution says grants you freedom of speech from the government. The government cannot censure you from speech, right? But you can't go in somebody's restaurant and scream whatever you want. You can't go into anyone's business and scream whatever you want. So the fact that this Twitter files is an issue, the fact that Elon has made it an issue, is because essentially what Kim was talking about yesterday. These people were grooming people at Twitter. People from the US government were essentially grooming people at Twitter. So they were essentially an extension of the US government. So now we have the freedom of speech, we have the constitutional right as an issue. But when we have someone like Elon Musk, who privatized a company, who is now saying, hey, these are the parameters. You don't abide by them, you don't get a pass because you're a journalist. That's the rules. So, it's just, let's not conflate these issues that so many people want to do. Let's not do that and just talk about the facts.
Let me tell you something that I think is the biggest problem that the US government and their Western allies will have with Twitter Files 8. The war in Ukraine is quickly losing support. When you look at people tweeting today compared to a couple months ago, the Ukrainian flags are gone. People are now calling out Zelensky as, corrupt. The things that you didn't see before are very strong now. If the US government loses their botnet, imagine what that means for the war. And that is also why the EU is putting so much pressure on Elon now, because they are so fully invested. They have spent tens of billions of dollars, the US now over $100 billion, into this proxy war to try and unbalance Russia. And imagine if they don't anymore have this propaganda machine that keeps it all going, when there's already so many voices against it now. Imagine that breaking off and you only hear the real voices. This war will be over in a week.
Is anyone talking?
Go ahead. No,
Hi, Tom.
Kim just stopped talking. That's all.
Okay. I didn't want to cut anyone off, but I just wanted to add to it. You guys, thanks for inviting me and thanks for starting this one up. Oh my gosh, what a day. This has been wild. But I just really quickly wanted to say, another issue is that the media never rectifies anything that they get wrong, including what Ian was just discussing. The fact that they were saying all of this hate speech and racial slurs had gone, up exponentially, when in reality it was coming from the same group of accounts. They never rectify that. They never fix the claims that they make. And it's so frustrating to watch it and just be completely blatantly lied to. And people buy it, the first initial take, and that's what they run with. And then they never fix it. There's never anything else said about it.
it's not
And
just them either. I mean, the media
here's
is
just
propelling it. Sorry, I'll let you speak next. The media is propelling it, and also, politicians like Elizabeth Warren and Ted Lieu are regurgitating that same lie. Yeah, just want to add that. So, Kim, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
so Adam Schiff is the one who is running the spear for this whole thing about Twitter now being having more hate speech, more attacks against minorities, against Jews, more anti-Semitism, like all this stuff. But who's creating this, right? These bots can be used for anything. So if the current government wants to make Elon look bad, all they have to do is increase these attack parameters against certain groups, and there you go. There you have your statistics right away, and they can point at a huge number of tweets that is doing the stuff. But this can all be created, and that's the problem here. So the number one priority for Elon right now is to kill all these bots, including all the government bots. And that is what they are most worried about, because once their propaganda machine is gone, and Twitter is the primary channel when it comes to anything to do with Ukraine, that is going to change the landscape for this war completely, because it already in reality has no more support. And if the bots fall away, then it's going to become crystal clear that 98% of the people are saying enough is enough. We don't want this shit anymore. And there's no more bullshit, that is manipulating people. Imagine how quickly this war will be over. And that's what they want to prevent. Because what does that mean? It means all the money that they've sent to Ukraine will then be wasted. They will never be able to recoup that. And Russia wins, China wins, the US loses yet another war and looks like a complete idiot. And the EU, that has gambled so much on this, which sees their industry getting deindustrialized and destroyed because of this crazy sanction regime that they started with the US, they are all going to lose out. So they've all made clear we cannot lose this war. This war will continue until Russia retreats and Ukraine has won. Imagine if they don't have the propaganda machine anymore. It will be very hard for them to achieve that goal.
What's really fascinating, I was thinking about the bots that you were saying, how they could be used to amplify hate speech. When Elon was in our chat, he kind of laughed at it. Like, I mean, not like laughed at it as in it's a joke, but he was alluding to something, right? He said that a small group of accounts was responsible for 300,000 hate speech messages, and he didn't want to go into it. He didn't want to explain who these people were, who these bots were, where they came from. And, like, part of me thinks, what if he was referring to these government bots? Like, he could have easily referred to, say, 8chan or something, right? Like, I mean, all of them, they're trolls. They could very easily do the same thing. And yet, he was very coy about the who these bots were, where they came from. It makes me think, this is a lot to do with the government.
Yeah, they can just create the evidence that they need to cause some problems.
I have a little bit of a different view than Kim on the Ukraine issue. I tend to think that we always plan to lose. The United States does when they engage in the sort of situations we're now dealing with in Ukraine. I don't think anyone wanted the Russians to invade. I don't think anyone wants the Russians to win in the United States. But they often act as if they don't want the Russians to lose. And I think one of the remarkable stories of the Ukraine war is the slow rolling of support out of the United States in support of the Ukraine war effort. It's now, when was the invasion now? 10 months, 11 months ago? It's probably longer.
Yes, it's February,
yeah.
So
Yeah, and now only are they going to begin to get Patriot batteries. It seemed to me if this was an opportunity to beat the Russians back, there would have been a quick and instant, as relatively speaking, an instantaneous mobilization of U.S. support. Instead, it was grudging. and which I think is an element of corruption, and I think most don't want to admit to, especially in this city, is that in my view, Joe Biden has been Putin has taken the measure of Joe Biden long ago. He's aware of his personal corruption as it links to his family. He knows money's gone from Moscow and Burisma. Everyone should remember Burisma was a Russia-friendly company, right? It was a Russia-linked company. It wasn't the Ukrainian side of the corruption ledger, and so he knew what was going on. So if you're going to engage in risky adventurism, why not do it when there's a compromised, conflicted, and really challenged president in the White House? And I think that was in large measure something that needs to be further discussed, that too many in the establishment don't want to discuss. So I'm meandering a little bit there, but the fact is that after Afghanistan and given the corruption of Biden, our strategic competitors in Russia and China have acted in ways that suggest they don't think much of Biden. And I would highlight the corruption that they all know about and factor that in. But I guess that's a broader issue. I do want to bring it back, though, to the Biden file. Excuse me, not the Biden files, but the Twitter files.
Yeah, Biden files is good. Hey, just to respond real quick. Most people don't understand what this war in Ukraine is really about. So I would just, in 1 minute, explain it really quick. What happened after the 2007-2008 financial crash, which was, caused by the US with their regulations, it allowed for this massive bubble, which then took economies all around the world down. The big financial crisis of 2007-2008. When that happened, a number of countries came together and said, we cannot trust the US to be the steward of the global financial system anymore. This has cost us so much money. They are gambling over there. They're not really acting prudently with the responsibility over the global financial system. So a couple of countries came together and formed BRICS. And BRICS is this new alliance of Russia, China, South Africa, India, and another country. And now they're talking about BRICS Plus, which is extending it by another 17 countries, including Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, and so on. Long story short, in 2009, BRICS announced that they want to move away from the US dollar as a reserve currency, and that they are looking at a pool of currencies that is backed by gold or other real world assets to compete against the dollar in trade. And Saudi Arabia has now joined this, which is the backbone of the petrodollar, and other countries have joined this. So the real reason why the US is seeking conflict with Russia and China is because they need to prevent this from happening. Because if the US dollar is no longer the reserve currency, or even just loses 50% of the reserve currency market share, the US is instantly bankrupt. With the high debt that the US has and the amount of money printing that is taking place to fund its excesses, once the US dollar is no longer the reserve currency, the whole house of cards comes crashing down. This is why we have this war that is aimed at unbalancing Russia, and that's why we have the conflict over Taiwan with China, and that is also why I think the US is going to start sanctioning China even more and saying, hey, as long as you are supporting Russia, we're going to go after you. And the whole thing is on a course of major escalation, because if the US cannot remain the hegemon of the world with the control over the reserve currency, it's literally bankrupt. That is why we are having this global conflict with China, Russia, and the US. That's a lot to think about.
Well, that's one theory.
Well, it's the one that makes most sense. Why do you think Europe, the entire West, is fighting against it? Because they're all relying on the current financial system the way it is. When the US started printing a lot of money, doing quantitative easing, and basically giving large banks interest-free loans to pump up the stock markets, all the other Western nations followed suit, did the same thing, quantitative easing, endless money printing. That entire system is now under threat because of BRICS. So the conflict that we are seeing is not about Ukraine. It's nothing to do with Ukraine. It's just to unbalance Russia and China.
Prodigal, did you have something?
Yeah, I mean, it's a real threat. If you look at China's Belt and Road Initiative, a lot of us look at this and say, well, China's overpaying for access to nations and resources that Western capital is pretty good at capitalizing on and making moves if there's money there. But when you look at the Belt and Road Initiative contracts, they have a mechanism within it that they can switch it to the yuan and basically denominate in their currency. I mean, if you look at U.S. trajectory, once our manufacturing base was hollowed out after NAFTA and opening China to the WTO, what does America have at this moment? It has consumerism and it has the financial system, right? You look at the raw resources that the world runs on, the BRICS have it. And that includes a lot of the precious metals, rare earth metals, and minerals and precious metals that the world's going to rely on for this alleged green revolution. And this is something where you're starting to see this. I mean, if you look at CCP speeches for the last couple of years, they basically said outright, we have stolen as much tech as we need to from the West, and now our focus is going to be on innovation. So if this does occur, whether through BRICS, which is expanding, and you see the Saudi Arabia deal where it's now initially was 30 million, now it's 50 million. Now they're saying use the Shanghai Exchange. There's issues regarding not only the ability to continue dollar-denominated trade, and a lot of nations are going to be forced to make a decision as to whether to keep the lights on and feed their people or continue in this system. That's why India, Israel, Turkey, a lot of nations have, even though they're NATO allies, Turkey in particular, have straddled the line, and their connections to the Sino-Russian alliance has increased. I mean, this is a real threat. Is it going to be overnight? No. But what people have to understand is a beachhead has been made, right? You don't need to have a competitor to MasterCard and Visa. If you start up as Discover and you start gaining traction, then it's there. And the more that this happens, the harder it's going to be to finance and roll over U.S. debt, especially at a time when rates are higher. So people who dismiss this and think, well, this isn't something that would play a role in U.S. geopolitical influence and policy, I would strongly be concerned about this, because you're looking at it on two fronts now. It's not only BRICS, which, yes, it's preliminary. A lot of nations are, asking to enter it. But it's also the Belt and Road Initiative. And, you look at it, China doesn't need to have higher per capita. They just need parity with the U.S. And based on their size, they outflank us. So this is a really, significant threat that, I'm concerned about. I would assume the national security state is concerned about. And, it's something that I think does play a role in a lot of our moves. But I think we're in a catch-22 at this moment, right? You look at the amount of wheat, aluminum, nickel, etc., that comes out of Russia and a lot of these BRIC countries, including natural gas and oil. If they take over the Middle East, which, Biden's relationship is not great there, especially with MBS. I mean, this is a big, big problem. And people really don't realize that when empires or, basically geopolitical states of this influence lose the reserve currency in this type of environment, there's no coming back. The only other time a nation was able, an empire had this happen, it didn't collapse, was the British Empire. But they handed the baton over to the U.S., their Anglo-Saxon cousin. At the same time, they underwent the Industrial Revolution, which created an entirely new economy. Does anybody see that occurring now? No.
And just look at the financial health of the U.S. A lot of people don't realize how bad it is. 32 trillion national debt, 92 trillion complete debt, 176 trillion in unfunded liabilities. If you add all of this together, it's more debt than all U.S. assets combined, of all companies, all land, every business, everything that is an asset in the U.S. is overshadowed by this debt and liability. So if the U.S. loses the U.S. dollar reserve currency status, it's literally game over. And just to give you an idea of the size and magnitude of BRICS now, with I think the total number of 17 countries that are have applied now, it's 50% of the world population and 40% of global GDP. That is significant enough to take the US dollar out.
As one of the things I think we should remember is that prior to the Twitter files, there's been plenty of information about some of the issues that we're talking about here. And, I kind of remember something coming up in some of our COVID records over at Judicial Watch about the Silken Road Initiative. And one of the other top billionaires that we're not allowed to talk about or raise questions about is Bill Gates. Musk, I guess all bets are off, but Gates is part of that protected class. And, there was, people don't understand this, but we found that there was a NIAID person in Beijing for Fauci, the National Institutes of Allergic and Infectious Diseases. So that they had a person in Beijing, in China, monitoring the Chinese public health activities, including the Wuhan Institute. Well, one of the interesting emails that we had uncovered in investigating that whole issue was a report by Chen about a Belt and Road high-level meeting for health cooperation that she attended. And this is what she talked about with respects to the Gates Foundation. So this is not Judicial Watch. This is a government official who reports to Fauci, reporting on what Gates was up to in China. On the approach for leveraging China's resources to help others, Gates Foundation is working with Chinese government on donations to its neighboring countries and African countries such as anti-malarial medicines, bed nest diagnostics, etc. More specifically, it helps Chinese companies to gain pre-qualification on medications so that Chinese company manufactured drugs can be sold outside China, helps the Chinese to establish bilateral collaboration with specific countries in Africa, teaches the Chinese how to do resource mobilization, and helps raise China's voice of governance by placing representatives from China on important international councils as high-level commitment from China. So I don't know about you all, but that sounds to me pretty extraordinary to have the Gates Foundation, as disclosed here by this government document, acting as an agent for the Chinese government in placing them in positions of influence to advance what certainly is not the U.S. interest, which is advancing this Silk Road Initiative, this Belt Road Initiative. Incredible material. And so I guess to all the listeners out there, look to see what already is out there, because what has been released is a relatively small group of documents out of one company about significant government and corporate misconduct. But there's tons of other documents out there from other entities such as Judicial Watch, members of Congress, et cetera. You all know where it all is. That has to be distributed to the marketplace as well in much more significant ways, because the media doesn't want to cover the fact that Fauci had someone essentially spying on the Chinese in China while funding the Chinese bio labs programs. They don't want you to talk about the fact that it's not just the FBI who was trying to get big tech to take down your content, but you had states doing it on the fly as well. They don't want anyone to talk about anything that isn't in the New York Times or Washington Post. That's why they want to control Twitter. That's why they want to control Facebook. That's why they want to control these other big tech platforms, because you get alternative access to information about what your government is up to from entities that are typically suppressed, like Judicial Watch and some of the others that are popping up. I see Project Veritas was, and James O'Keefe was finally back allowed on Twitter again. These folks are potentially very, very, very troublesome. for the establishment that is not only national, but as I say, transnational in nature.
Yeah,
Yes, Basil.
just to add to that, Tom,
Go ahead.
this connects it both to the Twitter censorship and corporate media censorship, right? If President Biden is compromised by Chinese or Ukrainian assets, which is forcing our hand in Ukraine or forcing us to basically be ineffective in combating China's rise on the geopolitical stage, this is a problem for everybody. And if it ends with the U.S. no longer being the sole superpower or losing the reserve currency 10, 15 years down the line and we are bankrupt, regardless of your political affiliation, you're going to be on the streets starving. Right. So at a certain point, you have to put partisan ideology behind you and say, can I trust the actors who are running the country? And to me, the answer is no, because these are the same entities that hid the laptop during Trump's Ukraine impeachment that had exculpatory evidence that was already verified. And now you look at the money flowing to Ukraine when how long did it take Flint to get clean water? What about Mississippi? Look at the border. What's coming over? This affects you every place. Under U.S. law, you're required to provide education to children, even if they're illegal. Well, if we have 6 million people coming in, how many school teachers do you have to hire? How many pensions are that? How many healthcare funds? How many ESL teachers? How many of them are going to have actual conditions that require special education? You are going to go bankrupt. The country is going to go bankrupt. This is at a same time where, regardless of what they say, the economy is in recession. You cannot find cheap housing. You cannot find cheap rentals. You go to the store, the prices are going up. You think competing against 6 million more mouths are going to help you put food on the table and make a better future for your children? You think paying higher taxes for people who don't even belong here? Like, this affects every facet of your life, but they have you laser focused on one thing. Nobody's saying don't be compassionate. Nobody's saying don't give refugees asylum, right? But there is no such thing as economic asylum, right? America has become a glorified Costco membership, right? You don't get to flee here based on crime or based on lack of economic opportunities. If that's the case, I know of a lot of American cities where people would like to flee to Scandinavian countries based on crime, based on lack of opportunity. So you have to look at these issues logically and say, well, where are we heading? Where are we heading when fentanyl overdose deaths are at all-time highs and they're killing America's youth and basically killing the Rust Belt? You have to ask yourself, what are these people who are telling you these euphemisms and giving you these lies? Do the actual end results match the policy and the rhetoric? And the answer, since the 1990s, whether it was H.W. Bush, whether it was Clinton, whether it was George W., or whether it was Obama, the answer is no. And if you can't see that at this point, then you have nobody to blame but yourselves when the end result comes.
You know what I think is interesting, and I'd be interested in Kim and Ian's take on this, since you and anyone else has any views. The latest Twitter dump, the Twitter Files 8, which, to bring everyone up to speed, I kind of, we just assume everyone's joining at one time, but Twitter Files 8 shows that the Pentagon had a series of front bots, mostly it looks like in Arabic accounts, that they created to try to influence countries abroad related to our war fighting in Russia, Syria, and elsewhere. I think that's a fair compilation. And Twitter knew that they were there, and they didn't do anything to shut them down or police them. Now, the question, I think what's interesting about this latest revelation is that the prior revelations have been not helpful to the left's narratives, which is to demand that content moderation and censorship be a primary focus of big tech media, and that it's the job of government to help them do that. And we see from politicians who were responding, in fact, they should be forced to do it in some respects through threats. But this is something that I think the left is, typically opposed to, right? Propaganda efforts by the military that may or may not be, but certainly because it is on an American platform, they can say, well, we were directing it overseas. But obviously, as Kim has pointed out, that American citizens can see it as well. What's the left's reaction to this going to be? Are they going to continue to keep their head in the sand and continue to cover up of the content of this material, or will they begin to ask questions? I say that rhetorically, thinking that it won't change things, but I'm wondering what others think about this. Because if this doesn't change things, I don't know what else would.
Yeah,
you're exactly right. This is so important that if nothing happens now, we're lost. It's game over. Like, we're literally going to live in a totalitarian world where, you know, our rights are meaningless.
You've always been at war with East Asia. That's a 1984 reference. But you know, beyond that, I do see a lot of anti-war left people speaking out about this. And what's interesting is that Li Fang's article on The Intercept that actually goes in depth into the Twitter files today, I recommend people read it, was co-written by Ken Klippenstein. And Ken Klippenstein, he and I are not friends. We don't like each other. But he did a good job here. And to my understanding, he is a leftist. So the fact that it was published on The Intercept and they were willing to run this story that was very arguably anti-establishment is interesting. I would hope to see you know, influencers, people like Hasanabi and such, actually weigh in on this issue, because thus far they have been very anti-Elon Musk, you know, just going after him for going after journalists and things like that. But this is way bigger than Elon Musk, right? This is about American foreign intervention, its foreign policy, and how they're using the military-industrial complex, which historically the left has been opposed to, and it has been the #1 target of the left, to see them take action against this. I would like to see members of Congress, especially the Squad, or at least some members of it, maybe someone beyond Ro Khanna, right? Because he can't be the only person who's opposed to this. I would like to see other members, even the people I dislike, like AOC and Ilhan Omar, actually speak out against this, because they have, in Congress, spoken out against the military-industrial complex, although ultimately they did end up voting for supporting the war in Ukraine. I would like to see them actually wake up and or at least listen to their constituents. You know, I think it's very important for their constituents to speak up and give them some phone calls and say, hey, be opposed to this. Like, this is a serious issue when the government, the deep state, is using bots to manipulate to manipulate what am I saying? To manipulate the discourse on social media and make people for war in a way that is not beneficial to any U.S. taxpayer, much less the people who are on the receiving end of those bombs, right? I mean, they claim to care about not going to war. They claim to care about helping people in the Middle East, all those black and brown people. Well, now's the time to speak up. And if they don't speak up, as Kim.com says, we're screwed, right? Like, the world is screwed if they control the narrative and they don't want to, you know, like, move away from that U.S. foreign policy that is so pro-war. I think something really does need to change, and hopefully these files will present themselves as a shakeup of some sort.
Yeah, the problem is that it's not going to happen, because people like the Squad are, I'll just say it, the most despicable part of this country, in my opinion, because, and they're the biggest hypocrites, okay? You have Ilhan Omar, who cries a foul every time anyone who's not as left-wing as she is says anything that's not according to her principles, and plays the gender card. And yet we have the women of Iran being slaughtered, and she won't take a stance. And she is an Islamic Republic apologist. So I don't have respect for those people, and I don't think that they're ever going to do what you said, Ian. But what I do think is that what you said is extremely important. And what I want to say to people is, you know, when you find out that you know, stuff on, let's say, your side, let's be real, there are sides, right, you know, isn't kosher. This is what I do when I advise, when I do crisis management. When you find out, don't shy away. Talk about it. Put the microscope on it, because, you know, you have to stick to the principles. You have to fight for the principles, not the people speaking, because you don't understand. Right now, if you're not worried about this because guess what? You guys suck. We had to sit through 8 years of Trump. We hated you guys. Now, you know what? This blah, blah, blah. Guess what? That's just a formality. That's just the result was in your favor this time. The principle is what matters.
You have to fight for the principle. If it's okay this time, you're setting a precedent. It's going to be okay next time. And you can't guarantee the results will always be in your favor. You've got to argue and fight for the principle. And if you are not seeing this, I really encourage you to not think about who's speaking these things up here, and think about what the content of the message actually is. Right? You shouldn't be censored. Doesn't matter if you hate what the other person is saying. I will try to fight for that person's freedom of speech, even if they tell me I'm the worst person in the world. That's okay. Right? That's okay, because you know what? If they can't do it, then I can't speak my mind either. Thanks.
I want to bring in a new voice here. George Schachtel is someone, I don't think I've ever talked to Jordan, but he has a great take on Twitter, something.
I love Jordan. I love his tweets. He's awesome.
Yeah,
Like, he was one of the first people to
Thank
speak
you.
out against lockdowns. He's great.
Yeah, Jordan's sharp and incisive, and I don't think I've seen what you've been talking about in terms of the Twitter files. But Jordan, join the conversation. I'd be interested to hear. There's this Twitter files dump number 8, and appreciate your point of view on the current crisis.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I think just to give this a 30,000-foot picture, my take on all of these releases, and a lot of us have been suspicious of this, is that basically the ruling class in the United States has, until the purchase of Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter, they've controlled all the levers of power and all the means of the dissemination of communication. And I think this is the biggest threat to the U.S. ruling class since Donald Trump became president, and you saw how ruthless they were with him over the course of his 4-year term. And I was just thinking about going back, and from the second that James Comey entered Obama's office with that dossier, it was absolute war. And I would expect that this is how the U.S. ruling class is going to approach Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter. I think that they'll try to do everything they can to weaken his position and get him out of there, get him to fold on at least some minute issues involving speech. And I think there's also interesting conversation going on about, what is the ideology here? And I don't really see this so much as an ideological battle, but it's basically they are members of the club, and then there's everyone else. And when you're inside the club in the U.S. ruling class, there are parameters within which you can debate issues. But when it comes to issues like we discussed, like funding the war, you notice that every single Democrat, regardless of if they're a traditional JFK Democrat, if there's any left, or a left-wing socialist like an AOC, Ilhan Omar, they're all voting for it because they know what they have to do. And it's the same thing in the Republican Party. And I think that although there are Republicans who are not part of the club, the vast majority of Congress is part of that club. And in addition to that, it's just that we have worse than our suspicions about how much the government controls the levers of power and communication in the United States. And it makes you really rethink what exactly is going on in this country, what stage the republic is in. And I just came in 20 minutes ago, but I think there's a lot of compelling thoughts here about the state of our monetary system, and I think that contributes a lot to it. And when you talk about the war in Ukraine, and we have this military-industrial complex that was just refueled with $850+ billion, and now they're passing a $1.7 trillion omnibus. And you have these gigantic institutions, and you need to feed the beast constantly. And even if that means debasing the value of Americans' wealth, the administrative state in DC continues to grow at an exponential scale. And I think that is, if I were to take one thing out of this, that's the one thing that's become very clear to me, is that the greatest threat to the freedoms of Americans and perhaps everyone abroad is the American ruling class that has levered up this debased currency to such a degree that they're now threatening a global depression. And of course, Russia and China are far from innocent here. What I think is interesting about Twitter Files 8 specifically is that it basically revealed that everyone's doing the same thing with the black propaganda operations. I didn't see it as any type of like big scandal. It was just like, yeah, this is what everyone's doing, and all of these major world powers. What I'm becoming more and more convinced of is that these global superpowers, whether you're living in Russia, China, US, Iran, you're not getting the government that you deserve right now. And that's kind of just a common theme in history. And unfortunately, we're approaching some interesting times, some tough times ahead. But Tom, I appreciate you letting me take the stage, and I'll offer it back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Jordan. What's frustrating? I want to go back to Musk, and not everyone here is a supporter of Trump, and I understand it's not about the politics. But as the head of a government watchdog group, an anti-corruption group, a group that helps support whistleblowers, sees government corruption in awful ways up close sometimes, I saw immediately what was going on with Trump was just outrageous in terms of the abuse of his civil liberties, the changing of the rules, the lawlessness that was being used by these agencies that, are entrusted with significant powers by the American people, the FBI, the DOJ, et cetera. And at the time, in 2017, when all of Washington, including many Republicans, said, we have to let the special counsel operate. Judicial Watch was virtually alone in saying this is all a scam. It's an abuse. There's no good faith basis for any of these investigations. It's all a lie. Everything that has been vindicated, not because it was new information, but because, it just people began to accept that the information that Trump had done nothing wrong was always there, and they were just lying about it. And I just see that happening again with Musk. And I see Musk, doing something in good faith and receiving virtually no support from anyone, present company accepted. And what I think is particularly remarkable, Jordan, I'd like your reaction to this, and everyone, this is something I've been harping on in these spaces earlier, is the lack of Republican leadership support and a kind of providing a veil of protection to Musk over the abuse and retaliation he's suffering from the Biden administration and members of Congress. Where's the leadership in defending Musk for advocating for the free speech rights of mostly, in practical terms, Republicans? I mean, am I being unfair to the Republicans and thinking they're dropping the ball on this just as they did with Trump in the early days?
I've seen quite a few interviews of Republican lawmakers that are saying they are supporting what he did and they are thankful to him and that they want to investigate this. So there are definitely quite a few that are talking out in Elon's favor.
Yeah, there's certainly.
Am I being unfair, Jordan, too, or what do you think?
No, not at all. I mean, there's certainly maybe a couple dozen Republicans in Congress, but look what's on the agenda. Tomorrow they're holding a celebration of democracy and having Zelensky speak in prime time in front of a joint session of Congress. And Mitch McConnell just said today that the most important issue for Republicans is giving $45 billion more to Ukraine. And I'm only in my early 30s, but I've never witnessed in my entire life a greater separation between the interests of the average American citizen and what is going on in D.C. And I lived in D.C. for quite some time. And, that was one of the reasons why I left, is because that town has become so ridiculous and so detached from the American citizens, whether financial or family interest, personal interests, that it's just a total clown show. And I think you're right that Elon Musk has not gotten the credit he deserves. And I hope that at least behind the scenes, there are some legislators that are interested in working with him on, continuing to expose this stuff. Thanks.
Plus, the other thing is, other than the bots who have been voting against him, there is a huge amount of people that are supporting him, that see what's happening here. And, I see it every day in the replies that he's getting to his tweets, in the likes that his tweets are getting. There are definitely a shit ton of people out there that appreciate very much what he's doing.
Right. Well, there's no doubt that there's a grassroots support. Who wants to speak here? Saeed Sirish, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Hi. I'm basically here to speak about the bots, but I also would like to comment on what Jordan spoke. So, being Syrian who lives in the Middle East, and while we read content from media in several languages from different regions from the East and West, we always observed and saw how the English content, basically coming from the US, is always based toward more wars, toward one-sided, like always it's Russia that is the only evil. Always there is support for military action against Iraq, against the Middle East, which result in, selling more weapons, more oil production, and so on. So I'm glad that something finally happened, like the Twitter files, which is like a wake-up call for the American who always believe that they have a free journalism. So they can wake up and see that every media in every country or region is somehow influencing specific parties in the governing bodies or their political views. Back to the bot, I have a question for Kim. So we know, creating 5 accounts, 10 accounts, or whatever can be somehow doable. But when you speak about an army of bots, the registration, the creation of tens of thousands of email addresses, the registration of them, and then flowing content between them coming from different IP addresses and so on. Do you think this is something that is created with the help in the back end of Twitter, or it's just that the Twitter red team and blue team did not invest properly in behavior analysis and to prevent such type of bot? Because this also could be an answer of how other social media are being manipulated, like Facebook, which is more hard to be having bots, let's say, compared to Twitter. So what is your input about this?
Well, first of all, it has been made clear in the Twitter Files 8 release today that the US government is sending lists of accounts for whitelisting, meaning these accounts are not going to be touched, they're not going to be removed. If a moderator clicks on one of these accounts, there will be immediately like a red bar on top, don't touch this account, right? So Twitter is, of course, assisting in protecting these accounts that are used for propaganda around the world. But here's something that is even worse. The intelligence community, through their mass surveillance, basically has every account with every password for any social media, any email account around the world, because they have access to all your data. Like anything that you've ever done on the internet in the last 10 years is now sitting in a spy cloud that 5 countries share, the Five Eyes. So if they need 100,000 accounts out of the blue that have, years of history, what they're going to do, they're just going to go into their database, look for accounts that have been dormant for many years, and just activate them and use them. They don't even have to go and create 100,000 accounts fresh, which would be visible, which you could easily detect. They're just simply going into their spy cloud and getting the accounts that they need out of there. And then you have a very diverse number of accounts that used to be real accounts that have different creation dates and that are just not being used. So it's okay for the intelligence community to utilize them as bots. But that is how easy it is. It's not just sitting there creating new accounts.
And where are they done? Where are they operating from? Who? Is it China? Is it Middle Europe? Where?
No, I mean, they will, of course, have different data centers in different countries. So they can make their bots look like they're coming from all these different geolocations. So the US government is investing enormous amounts into their data centers. And for example, the spy cloud in Utah has the capacity to store all human communications for the next 50 years, all emails, SMSs, voice, everything. People don't understand or realize that anything that you say, just like when you look at this Twitter space right now, and you have this feature on where it turns speech to text, that is a technology that the US government is using for over 10 years. So people who think that they're actually storing audio recordings of everyone having a call, no, they're just converting it into text, and then it's fully searchable in the entire database body that they have in the spy cloud. So every communication that you ever had over the phone in the last 10 years is sitting there in text format and is fully searchable and can then be analyzed.
Well, I've always presumed that. So to test the new bot, I don't know if the new bot system is in place or the new anti-bot polling system, but Elon Musk just posted a tweet a few minutes ago. Should Congress approve the $1.7 trillion omnibus spending bill, which for those of you outside the United States is a temporary measure. I don't know how long. Is it, Jordan? What is it, 9 months now? That will essentially fund the government or aspects of the government for 9 months. And he replies, bots incoming, to his own tweet. So currently it's running 75% no, which is probably what it would have been. It's strange how that poll so obviously brings out conservative voices to participate, and the fact that his poll about him remaining the head of Twitter didn't. Boy, there was something about that was not like the other polls. That's for sure. That certainly suggests that. And the other Elon Musk news of the day, I thought that's interesting. In addition to the Twitter file drop, again yesterday, the FBI giving $3.5 million at least to Twitter to spy on and censor Americans, act as an informant against you, dear American, dear Twitter user. And then today, the disclosure that Twitter knew that there were bots trying to influence policy, but they were directed at foreigners, so they didn't care, and they were created by the Pentagon. But he highlighted something in response to, or called out, Adam Schiff on. I just had his tweet up there. Maybe someone can pull it more quickly than I can. That can read. Oh yes, he wrote to Twitter. He initially tweeted out for part 7. His retweet read, "Government paid Twitter millions of dollars to censor info from the public." That's a charitable interpretation of it, although outrageous. And then he replies to that tweet, "As outgoing chair of House Intelligence, did you approve hidden state censorship and direct violation of legislative changes to hold his company and other big tech companies liable if they didn't keep censoring the way they wanted it?" But one thing that many people don't know about Schiff is that he did this type of spying on his own through Congress. And, we've highlighted the kind of the intelligence state spying on Americans. But under the Pelosi Congress, they've expanded their purview, and it's accelerated under the January 6th committee, to include the ability, at least during the impeachment of Trump, they took it upon themselves to secretly issue subpoenas without court authorization, so just on their own power, to telephone companies targeting Trump's lawyers and others, and they took those phone records and then published them. And we had sued for access to those records, and they said they essentially had authority to do what they wanted, and no court could over either require the disclosure of the subpoenas or even supervise what they were doing. So the Congress, the Pelosi House, told the court, and we couldn't get the documents, that they had the power to do these secretive subpoenas, and there's nothing any American could do to find out what they were up to. And so, that's a pretty extraordinary assertion of legislative power, and it's one that I think is at odds with our Republican form of government. But I just want folks to know that the critics of Trump, of Musk, are, have authoritarian tendencies, and it's not just free speech they don't like; it's the right to petition your government they don't like. It's freedom of association they don't like. And, these core civil liberties are under attack in at least modern America in ways, you'd have to go back. I was thinking to, the World War I era, where we had some laws that were passed by the Wilsonians to suppress their political opposition. I think one has to go back that far for anything similar. But in terms of the reach and scope and suppression in terms of the sheer numbers of people, there's nothing to compare in modern history, at least on the American side, with what the government's been doing in terms of them thinking they have the right to suppress speech. And that's what these Twitter files are showing. And the fact the media is ignoring it is just despicable. Yes, just thanks.
Yeah, to that, I wanted to say, when you have to redefine something to make it legal, right? When it's no longer dictatorial tendencies, it's now we're doing this. Oh no, it's not that. It's this because of the ends that you're trying to reach. That's a huge red flag, and I see that happening all the time here. And then I wanted to ask Kim a question. In the prior space, Kim, you said something about part of the process was taking over actual real accounts. Can you explain that again? Thanks.
You mean what I just said 15 minutes ago, or in the other space?
No,
I don't.
in the other space, you said one of the things they do is they take over actual real accounts. Do they computerize them, or what do they do? Do they that make them go on automation, or what do they do with those?
So I think I was talking about the NAFO bots, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's a 3-layer approach that the CIA has with NAFO bots. One is they have a group of people that are real people that really believe in the cause of Ukraine, and they kind of got them into this NAFO group with these dogs that they're using, as an avatar, and they're just basically normal people, about 3,000 to 3,500 of them, which I call the legitimate front end. And then there's the illegitimate back end, which is automated bots. But then there's another back end, which is real people that work in the intelligence community, over 100,000 of them, that have access to 30 to 40 Twitter accounts each. So they're using the legitimate front end that looks all normal to basically be the NAFO face. But then when they are tweeting stuff against people that are having other opinions about the war, that are calling it a proxy war, that are saying, is Ukraine really worth risking a nuclear war? Shouldn't we be negotiating for peace like Elon did? Elon said, hey, let's have peace in Ukraine. And he made a proposal. And then he was attacked by these NAFO bots. So what happens, these front end people are saying something, and then they get amplified by the max by these bots in the background. So they give them huge likes, they make sure that they get more visibility, and if there are any polls or whatever, they're going in and skewing them in favor of their agenda. So for example, there are a couple of CIA operatives, and I named them in the other space that we had, that are making tweets about Ukraine, and they end up with 40, 50, 60,000 likes. And these are small accounts that only even have the amount of people or the amount of visibility. They're like unknown people. And one guy who has quite a big ego and is the head of the whole NAFO operation. He's a CIA operative who spends a lot of time in Ukraine. He gets these tens of thousands of likes. But then, for example, when he hosts a Twitter space where, obviously real people join to talk, then he has only a couple hundred people. Or when there was a chat that a government funded think tank did with NAFO, where they were basically putting it on their hashtag saying, hey, we're going to have this live interview, and we're going to get patted on the back for all the great work that we do. And there were literally only 115 people watching this. So NAFO pretends to be this massive group of people that are all supporting Ukraine. But when you can measure it, where bots cannot join, when they are not going on YouTube to watch a live stream, you see that the real numbers are actually minimal. And that exposes that the whole back end is illegitimate and is just botting.
So I just want to, having heard that again, I just want to emphasize how vital it is that Elon's tackling these issues. I was hired a few months ago by a company, a quite well-established company in Web3 that was sabotaged. And I just want to explain, we did this sort of undercover thing we found out who was doing it. They were botting their account, and we went undercover, and we posed as sort of this account posed as sort of a potential client of theirs. So I just want to say a couple things. They can do, yes, they can vote, right, in polls. They can they can retweet, and believe it or not, they can start to comment. The comments are not sophisticated, right? But it is still related to the subject matter, right? So it won't be about if it's the poll is about Ukraine, if it's going to be a comment, it'll be a brief comment, but it won't be like about apple pie, right? It'll be something relevant. So it's not going to catch people. People aren't going to catch it. And the other thing I wanted to say is there's that element, and there's so much time and money being spent on that. Then there's another thing, right? And this is what happened to my client. There's another thing where you can actually tell these people that you want to sabotage someone else, right? Whether you want to sabotage their poll or their account. And you get obvious fake bots. And you can bot their account, you can bot their poll or whatever. And then what they do, and this is what they did to my client, what they do is they say, hey, look at you guys. You guys bot your followers. You guys are bots. You're not real. You must be liars. You must be, breaking the law and this and that. So they use that, which they set up, right? They set up, they paid for, and sometimes it's a competitor, believe it or not, to send bots their way, and they can vote on polls, they can retweet, they can and they can sometimes comment. And it is so easy, and it is so cheap. It's so cheap. And so it is very concerning. So we have two fronts. One is they're getting very sophisticated on the front of they're actually kind of looking like real, right? And on the other front, they're actually on purpose looking fake and then calling someone out. And I'm just really happy that Elon's working on this, because the level of sabotage here is just out of control.
And this is why the government is now out of control, because they want to prevent Elon from succeeding, taking this massive asset away from them. They don't want to lose this power of propaganda and skewing public opinion and manipulating people into believing that this war is great. If they lose this, like I said earlier, the war in Ukraine will have a very short shelf life.
Prodigal, did you have a point you wanted to make?
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on Ukraine, then I got to head out because it's been a couple of hours. I mean, when you look at these actors guiding this policy, and if you take a realpolitik approach, the policies are insane, right? You look at what's been going on in Ukraine, the escalation even before the conflict, and they're telling you Russia's a threat to the world, but at the same time, they constantly brag how it's getting their ass kicked, and it's one or the other. I don't think Russia has any intentions of touching a NATO state. They would be insane to do so. But the propaganda says otherwise. And when you look at the off ramp, there is no off ramp right
May
now.
I interrupt you for a second?
What happened?
Yeah, Elon Musk just replied to me when I tweeted spaces are unstable, keep crashing and bugging out today when we try to discuss the drop of the new Twitter files involving the DoD. He just replied to it. He said he's looking into it.
He's on the case. Great news.
Yep, he's on the case.
Good.
He's on the case right now. Yeah.
I mean,
stuff, man. I love this dude. Like, he listens to us. Very cool. Very cool.
There's no off ramp from where we're going, and we're starting to butt heads with a nuclear power. Right now, it's been confirmed via the New York Times and another organization that both the U.S. military, whether through CIA contractors and also the UK military, is operating in Ukraine, right, on an individual state level. These are both still NATO members, right? You look at where this is going, the Nord Stream pipeline sabotage, it was investigated, and they said it was clear sabotage. If they had evidence to show it was Russia, they would have announced it to the world. When you look at the need for free flow of information, people on Twitter and a lot of anons were quick to show that the stray missile that hit Poland was from the Ukraine S-300 system because it only has a radius of about 60, 70 miles. But if they controlled the flow of information, we could have been in a nuclear war with Russia within a day.
That's exactly right. It was Twitter that debunked it, right?
Yeah.
It was Twitter that debunked
it was Twitter.
it.
AP News cited an unnamed CIA source, and later he got filed because he didn't cover his tracks good enough. But it was Anon, OPSEC, and other Twitter people who showed that there was no way this was a stray Russian missile. So I mean, you look at where
and then again on Twitter, a photographer posted the pictures of the rocket, of the missile fragments, and they could immediately identify what they were. So Twitter kind of spoiled the whole plot.
So where is the off-ramp, right? There is no off-ramp. They don't want an off-ramp. And this isn't just a war with Ukraine on the ground, right? This is a geopolitical, economic war that is stressing, even if the West is going to make out of it fine, just with increased inflation and less choice of goods at the supermarket, we are bleeding the third world and emerging markets dry. Africa in the last year has 90 more people approximately at the edge of starvation. I know we care about Ukraine, but do we not care about Sri Lanka? Do we not care about Somalia? Do we not care about these other countries where they're going to basically be starving to death and unable to basically have electricity and be able to actually have healthcare and medical treatment? This is not something you can view in a vacuum. This is something you have to view overall, and you have to see what the end game is. And if we can't have free conversations and see what's going on, it's going to be a very big problem. And it could end up, and God forbid, a nuclear winter, a nuclear war. Over what? Both sides can come to the table to have peace. There's been multiple reporting that a peace deal could have been reached back in April, but Boris Johnson flew to Ukraine and basically put it to rest. You listen to NATO, and they constantly say that this is going to grow and that it might grow larger and we can't have peace. What is the end game? What is the off ramp? And it seems right now the West does not have a game plan in regards to de-escalation and trying to come to terms. And this isn't just about Ukraine, it's about the whole world. So I think people should strongly consider this, at least when they look at this situation. And remember my words when you see people starving to death in Africa, children, women, babies. This is all in play, and it's something that people should consider. This shouldn't be considered in a vacuum. I got to head out.
And there are people starving to death here in America.
No, I agree. I think our focus
freezing to death in Europe. Nobody talks about that, but refugees are freezing to death because there's just not enough electricity to keep people warm. It's insanely expensive. Like, ask anyone who lives in England right now, and they'll tell you their bills have skyrocketed by like 400%. That is food that's not on their table, right? That's insane. That is absolutely insane.
So I want to talk a little bit more about the leadership transition that Musk has signaled in his tweeting over the last few days. Lex Friedman, who is, I guess, an MIT researcher. He runs a podcast. I don't know much about him other than he popped up in the news recently as offering to run Twitter for Musk. He writes today, sadly, I've been attacked a lot over the last 2 days. For example, my Wikipedia page was edited to mostly remove my time at MIT. I'm a research scientist at MIT, working there since 2015. I love it. The people there are amazing. The attacks aren't fun, but I remain optimistic, and he has a heart at the end of it. You know, so this is a guy who put himself out there. He's obviously an ally, a friend of Musk. You know, the left wants to destroy Musk, and, you know, that part of that methodology means going after his allies, friends, and families. But what does this say about his ability to recruit someone to come in and take over what I would submit is an inherently political position, given the public interest here, to help him run Twitter?
But first of all, I think it wasn't his intention to lose that poll. I think he underestimated how many bots there still are. So that was a learning curve for him. I don't think he's going to step down. It makes no sense. He's put in $44 billion. He wants to recoup his investment, and you know, he's learning. He's in a new domain. This is all new to him. He's a genius. He's a visionary. He is very quick in adapting to new situations, but you got to give him some time because this is all very new to him. The other thing is, not even Jack, who was the CEO of this company before, has managed to make it profitable. And I never understood this. Like, you know, my businesses, at one point, my companies were in control of 4% of global internet traffic with many hundred millions of users. I know how to monetize mass users. I could never understand how Jack wasn't able to make Twitter a profitable company, you know? But you see Elon making the right moves with introducing premium services, with adding additional features where, you know, people will be able to host long form video, maybe even live streaming. You know, he's really opening Twitter up with great premium services to switch from an advertising model to a premium model. And I see absolutely no reason why Elon shouldn't achieve within a year a profitable Twitter. It's in my mind, it's a no-brainer. But, you know, for him to be in the situation where he is now attacked because he is opening up all the wrongdoing, he's exposing everything that was wrong about Twitter, which also, by the way, held it back. Like all of these censorship activities and shadow banning have moved a lot of Twitter users away to other platforms, you know, Parler, Truth Social, you know, and some of these people have now built new engagement there with new followers there. They may not even want to come back to Twitter. So it was detrimental to the company that Twitter did that.
Yeah. I personally, you know, Parler for me doesn't work. It's, you know, I've tried to use it, but it's just wonky as a system. I like Truth Social. I like the energy there. I think it's kind of a fun platform. Seems to work well. It's pretty simple. But, you know, Twitter has an unusual reach, which is very difficult to compete with. So, Kim, you're thinking that he's not going anywhere, that we shouldn't expect someone to come in as a day-to-day manager to replace him anytime soon.
Unless he wants to write off $44 billion and just call this, you know, a nice little adventure. Absolutely not. Like, he can't afford it. And the next problem he will have is there's maybe a handful of people who understand this business and who understand how to monetize it. When you are in this mass user environment, there's literally not a lot of people who understand this business, right? So it's not like any of the companies that he's been building or dealt with in the past, not even when he was, you know, still coding himself, working at PayPal and things like that. This is completely different. And it will just take him some time. But the good thing is that he has the mind to comprehend all of this. He's learning quickly. And these few mistakes that he's made since he's taken over, I'm sure are not going to happen again. He's the kind of guy who learns quickly from mistakes and adjusts course accordingly. So, he will have to remain CEO for some time, at least until Twitter is profitable.
Ian, what's your thinking on the current status of the leadership issues that Musk himself has raised? And I think as I was suggesting earlier, he's kind of walked back.
These technical, very engineering oriented teams. And I don't think there's the guy yet. Like he's the only guy who can do it right now. I think in the long term, maybe 3-6 months or something, he might find somebody. But right now, he still has to stabilize Twitter as a platform. I mean, as he told me, Twitter just doesn't have a core functionality. It's just not there yet. They don't even have the tools to properly moderate people, right? Or properly even log moderation. So that's something they need to work on first. Build the infrastructure, allow for video publishing, content creation. And this is something he has addressed multiple times. Even in a recent tweet to me just a couple of days ago, he agreed with what I said, that Twitter cannot be profitable unless it has content creation or content creators using the platform. And right now, there's just no reason for any content creators to want to use it because they can't monetize their content. That's as simple as that, right? So once he gets those systems in place, then maybe he can step back a little bit, delegate it to somebody else, someone like the woman who runs SpaceX. I mean, she does an amazing job with it. He needs somebody like that and teams in place for all of the engineering departments to be able to do that. Right now, I don't think he has that ability yet because they're still going through a lot of this whole backlog of people applying to work at the company. So I think that if anything, he will probably promote internally. He won't be looking for someone externally. He needs somebody who intrinsically understands the systems. And so this may take a few months because you want to see who rises up within those ranks, who understands the systems, who understands them as implicitly as he does. And I think that's where.
Yeah, Tom, it will also take somebody who has the courage and the fearlessness to step into the fold, because the attacks that are now happening against Elon are going to happen to anyone who's taking over the leadership role and sticks to this approach. So if Elon switches to the chairman of the board or some position like this, he will still want this to be the freedom of speech platform. He will still want to expose any kind of wrongdoing or future attacks by the government, and to find someone who has an understanding how to monetize a mass user site, how to introduce new products that make premium services really attractive for users, and at the same time have the willingness to risk everything that they have built in the past for being pro free speech and against these kind of moves. That is going to be really tough. So Elon, in my mind, he doesn't really have much of a choice. He will have to stick to this job for a while.
I know many of my supporters on Twitter have quite kindly suggested I be CEO of Twitter. That ain't going to happen. I'm happy to be running Judicial Watch, but Kim lays out the kind of the requirements, I think, quite well about the sort of person. Of course, who fits that requirement the best right now? Elon Musk, right? He's found his guy. It's him. And the other name that's been out there is Blake Masters. And about an hour ago, he put out a series of tweets. Blake Masters had run for governor or senator.
He ran for Senate seat.
Senate seat, yes. You would think as a political maven the way I am, I would know all this off the top of my head, but I'm not as...
There's no fight that guy could lead Twitter. Like I said,
this is what his response I thought was interesting. Blake said, "Don't think I'd want the Twitter job," which obviously is not a saying no. "It's probably a world of pain, 10 times more brutal than running for federal office. LOL." And can think of several others, Musk himself, David Sachs, who would be better at it anyways. But if I were CEO, this is how I think about it. And this is, I think, the kind of the analysis worth considering for the listeners here. First, free speech. The basic principle here is that anything goes unless it's illegal or literally putting someone in physical danger. This policy would protect a lot of ugly and unreasonable speech. So be it. No central authority at this scale should police speech. I suspect Elon Musk brought Twitter mainly because the pendulum had swung too far in one direction. The previous regime was too ideological and untrustworthy. They traded long-term cultural stability and healthy discourse for short-term political power by silencing their enemies, which is, I think, a very cogent point. No need to elaborate on why free speech is important, he goes on to write. Others have hashed that out long before us. But this part from Hayek, Hayek, for those of you who want to look him up, Friedrich Hayek, had stuck with me since high school. Many solutions to our current problems today are probably outside the Overton window. And the Hayek quote is, we shall not achieve its ends, liberties, if we could confine liberty to the particular instances that we know it will do good. He underlines, if we knew how freedom would be used, the case for it would largely disappear. If it is not also granted where the rules, the uses made of it by some do not seem desirable, it is therefore no argument against individual freedom that it's frequently abused. So the kind of a libertarian approach there. Second, product, and this is going to Kim's point, Twitter is incredible. I remember law school classmates in 2010 thinking I was crazy for seeing its potential then, but it's also more or less unchanged in a decade. Focus is a virtue, but stagnation is not. Twitter has not lived up to its potential. Good product design is like sculpting a statue. You can't start chiseling away and hope for the best, but if you are clear about what it is, then it becomes possible to excavate the vision from the stone. Twitter is real-time information network. That's what it is. It's begun to decentralize, quote, the news, or the news, he capitalizes, but its artificially limited scope has prevented it from being more than it could be. Apple is so powerful because they have designed a system of complementary products. Imagine if Apple had been so pleased with the iPod that it basically just stopped making stuff after that. Well, that's what more or less what Twitter did. If Twitter wants to excavate its David, it should fill its feeds with complementary products. IG, TikTok, and now, to some degree, YouTube's are fighting over short-form content. Twitter started as the short form content. Now it must develop and monetize longer form stuff on top. So he goes on. I'm not going to read every single tweet, but finally, the business side. I think in the medium and long term, the above approach would make Twitter profitable and way more valuable. So what do you think, Kim? And I went on a little bit there, but Masters is being suggested by many influencers as someone that should be considering here, and he's obviously been thinking about Twitter.
Yeah, but no chance. He doesn't need an influencer. He doesn't need someone who comes out of politics. He needs someone who understands, for example, data security, who understands, how to innovate in the space, with a developer background, who understands, the managing of bots, like understanding how to solve that problem in a permanent fashion. And for that, steps have to be taken that may be a bit radical to get it under control. Like every user should have the requirement to log in with two-factor authentication. I think it's good to, enforce, for example, premium membership in low monetization countries. So countries that are bot heavy, like let's say Eastern European countries, or even Russia, or other nations that are not really generating a lot of revenue but have a thick bot population. Those countries, I would make premium only. I would do things to make sure that in those markets that are costing me the most, creating me the most issues, I eliminate that by putting in drastic measures that make it impossible for those nations to be the bot hubs, right? So that there are so many things that you need to consider when running Twitter, and then understanding, how to innovate and how to make sure that you can monetize all these users. This politician cannot do that. There's no question about this. I think there's a handful of people that can do this, and I think very few of them are willing to take the risk to come on board in this toxic environment where now everyone who's going to go along with Elon's vision will be significantly and heavily attacked. Elon can deal with it because he has two things that you have to bring if you want to have this job. He hates bullies, and he will stand up to bullies. That is something, that's an attribute that he has, where he just has the strength to say, no matter what it takes, if I know I'm right and you're doing something that is not just, then I will stand my ground and I will fight you. That is such a strong attribute that he brings to Twitter, which I admire, because he's putting everything on the line. Don't forget it. Like, all his other businesses may suffer from these multiple attacks that are being launched against him to try and stifle his approach and make sure that he falls in line and shuts the fuck up, right? So, for someone to take this job, they need to have a similar willpower and a similar attitude towards bullies.
Well,
Also, I wanted. I'm sorry.
I want to highlight things first. I'll let you go next. The House Ways and Means Committee, which has jurisdiction over the Internal Revenue Service here in the United States, just voted to release Donald Trump's confidential private tax returns. There can't be a person in America, certainly someone of influence and wealth, who isn't looking at that and thinking, you know what, all bets are off in this country anymore. The politicians can take and release my tax returns now at the drop of a hat. What an abuse of power. And it's, to me, I've said it once, I'll say it again, our republic is tottering. Sphinx.
Thanks, Tom. The only thing I wanted to say was the what you read, the tweet, the politician's tweet. I apologize, I'm blanking on his name. Man says, "Okay, you just told me you didn't want the job, and then literally sent me your cover letter explaining your principles and why you'd be a great fit with your principles in a tweet." So, I don't think that's what Elon wants at all.
I don't want the job, but here's what I'd do if I had it. Right.
Yeah, I just would like
and let's
to
be
add
honest,
something.
you just can't trust a politician to run your business.
Yeah,
I mean, it's the last type of class of people.
Yeah, it's like the opposite of what Elon's been doing. And then this guy goes, "I don't want the job, but I'm going to spend 10 minutes of your time and tell you why I believe in it."
Well, it's go ahead.
Yeah, I think there is something also about Elon taking over Twitter, is that he understood the product more than Jack did. The guy is an influencer. I run an influencer's marketing agency, and I see that he understood Twitter more than Jack. He already has, I think, 100 million before he purchased, while Jack has like 6. So he did what the platform needs. He just created content. He engaged with the people. He created memes. So if someone need to come after Elon, he should have the same pattern in running things. Because if you look at Twitter as a product, nothing really has been added since before, except for the videos. Spaces were here before, videos were here, live views came in, all with the administrative of Jack. But what Elon did is he used it as a social media platform, not as an aggregator, as it was built for. Maybe if somebody will come as a successful CEO, he should be someone with a similar followers and type of content, someone like when Donald Trump used to tweet, who can do memes, who can do conversation, who can spark dialogues between different parties. That's what I think it should be, like someone who understands the business of influencers and social media work.
I think one thing that is pretty clear is that Elon bought Twitter because he loves it. He is one of the key users that drives, most of the traffic. His tweets are super popular, and he just loves it. It's his hobby. It's his passion. It's such a cool way to communicate. And he's also educating a lot of people how to communicate on Twitter, right? And he's really mastered it. So I think the number one reason why he bought it is he didn't want to lose it to all this bullshit that is happening, and he loves it.
And as someone who uses Twitter a lot too, I can see it changing almost daily. New features, a new presentation. I just noticed on the web app, there's an insights. The insights bar, the little graph bar you click on, has been moved in a way that's more readily apparent and accessible. Just more tweaks, and obviously that's someone who's not sitting on their laurels in terms of making this system work better. The advertising is interesting. One's tempted to buy that crazy wrench that seems to work for everything. I didn't see ads like that before. I never saw any ads that I was interested in,
Yeah, I see
practically
video
speaking.
ads, which is interesting. I mean, finally, like it caters to my interest. It shows me tech ads now because it sees, that I watch or tweet a lot about tech stuff. And before, it would show me some travel ads. Well, I don't travel very often. What's the point of showing me this, right? Also, I brought up Bricksuit. He's more familiar with Blake Masters than maybe anybody else on the panel here. So he had some stuff that he wanted to say about
Okay,
Blake
that's a good
Masters.
idea. Thank you. Hey, Brick, good to have you.
Hey, I just want to point out, Blake Masters has a significant background in tech. He was working with Peter Thiel, and before he started his campaign for Senate, and this is the only election that he's ever ran for, is this current contest for Senate in Arizona. He was a technologist, so I don't believe that you can easily dismiss Blake Masters as a politician. Ergo, he is incapable of running a business that has a technological bent. Blake Masters also has a very strong philosophical understanding of the type of issues that affect communication and First Amendment issues in America, particularly Section 230 and that type of regulation. So I just don't think that you can categorically say he's not qualified on the basis that he ran for office in one election.
Okay, so first of all, he was a venture capitalist. So that was his main activity before he became a politician. And what really worries me about him is that he is a protege of businessman Peter Thiel. Now, anyone who understands who Peter Thiel is knows that this guy is writing applications for spy agencies to more efficiently manage and data mine the mass surveillance data that they are collecting. So Peter Thiel is probably the last guy you want to have as a person of influence over Blake Masters, given his own history with his companies that are literally supporting the deep state.
Yeah, and Blake in the beginning, he said it sounds like Elon Musk is the best person to be running Twitter. I mean, that strikes me to be the case too. But you know what? As a conservative, I don't pretend to know how to run every company in the country, unlike most of my fellow Denzians here in Washington, D.C. And so, as Kim has pointed out, it's Elon's money on the line here. So he's going to make the decisions. And, those of us in the peanut gallery should be treated with the appropriate relevance. I guess that's the nice way of putting it. I think I want to try to bring this in for a landing. What do you all think, Kim and Ian?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, one more thing. So Blake's middle name is Gates. That disqualifies him.
Uh-oh.
Well, I want to apologize. Everyone, was trying to speak, and I was like, I couldn't figure out, this is my first time hosting the spaces. I wasn't aware that there were these large numbers of people requesting to speak. So I wasn't necessarily ignoring you. I probably would have had to, practically speaking, given the large number. But I wasn't aware that, because I got this, you get this notice that there's 100 people wanting to speak. I wasn't sure where they all were, and they were right in front of my face. I couldn't figure that out. So I wasn't purposely ignoring you. And the next time, it probably will be a purposeful ignoring you, because I don't think I can manage 100 people wanting to speak.
Do you want to move some people up so we can hear some other voices?
No, I think we have enough room, but I'm now that I'm more comfortable running it, I know how to bring people up in a more regular way and get some alternative voices in. So, next up, what do you think we can expect next from the Twitter files?
Well, I mean, all this stuff is already so explosive, and as I understand it, and as it was described in the looking at things, so we can expect much more. Like, we're literally early days. There's so much more to discover and uncover, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's Twitter Files 42 in a couple of months. The other thing is the aftermath of all of these releases is what I'm really looking forward to, because there will be investigations in the House. I know of a couple of people that had their accounts censored, that they are organizing in groups now to take legal action about that, maybe even, class action lawsuits. And I think they will be targeting the government. They will not necessarily target Twitter. They will go after the FBI. They will go after the administration that has allowed all of this, to take place with, questionable methods, paying Twitter to do this kind of stuff. Elon tweeted that just now, basically making the point that Twitter has been paid to censor people. So, there's a lot more coming down the road because of these releases, and that's really what I'm looking forward to. Imagine, some beautiful litigation with depositions of all of these FBI people, with discovery of documents internally within the DNC, within the political party, the Democratic Party, about what was discussed internally, to how to deal with Twitter, how to make sure that we can cover up this Hunter Biden story. I mean, there will be a lot of juicy stuff, I'm sure.
Ian.
Yeah. Yes. Sorry, I was reading text.
Yeah. What do you think we can expect next? I think Kim did a pretty good job, so don't feel like you have to speak if you're.
Right. Yeah. I think what we can expect next is I think we're going to see a lot of calming down. Fewer split-second decisions being made, and I think we're going to see the introduction of more features. Because when I just tried to upload a video, it actually showed me a little warning there at the bottom saying that, hey, don't close this browser window because it will cause your video to not show up. So that's a new thing. That wasn't there before. So it's like, I think they're adding new features piecemeal, and that's a really good thing. Yeah. It's helping a lot of users get used to these features as well, which is good.
Yeah, and I think the Twitter stuff, as you're pointing out, Kim, is going to be coming out in perpetuity, potentially, given the volume of records and topics. The big question to me is, will we be able to extract similar records from Facebook and Google? Now, Facebook runs Instagram as well under Meta, obviously, and Google is YouTube. And TikTok I'm putting off to the side because I see that as a foreign operation that it's a whole host of different issues. And although they treat them as an asset as well, it's pretty clear in recent months. And so is Congress, because I don't think they're going to voluntarily do what Musk did. That's not going to be in the offing. But the question is Congress going to be aggressive enough and willing to force out of the agencies and Facebook and Meta and Google similar records? Because that's where you're going to see the astonishing nature of the breadth and scope of this. Because relatively speaking, and I know based on conversations I've had, just generally in my work, is that Twitter is small potatoes compared to Facebook in terms of the number of users and just the whole operation. And Facebook is, we know just from the platform, Facebook is a much more sophisticated operation. And we know over at YouTube, they're still doing this censorship, and they're full in on it. And you have the interactions. And this is one thing I would be interested in, the interactions with the fact checkers, the interactions with media to get people to be censored, where they come in and say, oh, I see Kim Dotcom tweeted this. What do you think about letting him continue to tweet despite him being an evident violation of your terms of service, as, broadly read by the Washington Post, who I'm recalling for? though that's to me is going to be devastating if it comes down. And of course, the other big thing is the effort to destroy civilization by the left through the COVID shutdowns and such, and how that was affected through censorship on big tech. So I'm looking forward to all of that. I don't think any of us was expecting the Pentagon Papers today, but we got them. They were interesting.
Yeah.
But the censorship of Americans is where it's at. And, this is where if I were doing my journalism over at Twitter or investigating over at Twitter, I'd be like, I want to know who was abused, and I want to know it immediately.
So here's an interesting thing. Elon tweeted out several times now that they are going from record numbers to record numbers. More users, more engagements, more signups. This is the unique selling proposition that Twitter now has over all other big tech companies, which is we are now free speech. We're now, protecting our users. We are here to fight for you. None of the other guys are doing that. There are some smaller players, yes, they do that, but none of the big ones. And I think Twitter will see an enormous amount of growth simply because of that. And then you add on top of that all the new innovation that is going to come, all the new features that are going to come. I think the future of Twitter is bright, and I'm optimistic that I think not only will Elon recoup his investment, he's going to make this a powerhouse that will be worth much more than what he paid for it.
So Kim, on that, I'd love to add that this is free advertising for Elon too. I mean, this is a great strategy by him, and he doesn't have to be a politician to be a man of the people and to step forward and, basically put all this out, and he's on the news and he's on the front page and he's bringing people in. I also wanted to bring up a point and get the panel's opinion on this. I mean, what's happening with the FBI and the intelligence community is the same thing that's been going on for the last 75 or 100 years, where if you take the State Department, for every country in the world, even the smallest country, there's probably 200 people that are assigned specifically to that country. And many of the people, the citizens in the US, they don't know how it works. But let's say that, take the smallest country in the world, there's say, 100,000 or 500,000 people, there's 200 people at the State Department listening to every radio station, every podcast, reading every paper, people on the ground. They know everything about those countries. And so now they've just moved that over to social media. They're doing the same thing. And then on top of that, in terms of foreign policy and what's going on in Ukraine, I mean, the US loves to have their foreign policy isolated in one country. I spent quite a bit of time in Afghanistan, and I can't, $1 trillion, I couldn't tell you where, other than some of the roads that I saw, I couldn't tell you where $1 went. You can't see it anywhere. I also spent time in Dubai several years, and I know quite a few people in the intelligence community. I know all about Project Raven. I'm sure Kim knows about that. That's where they did all the spying on the U.S. citizens from, they call it the Villa in Abu Dhabi. And, they're super tied in with the Middle East and all that stuff. But I guess from what we're seeing that's coming out on social media, it's basically just an extension, from my perspective, as to what's been going on for forever. And it's just, I think maybe the public hasn't known about it.
Yeah, thank you.
I got a little bit of breaking news here from Elon Musk. He just tweeted out, I will resign as CEO as soon as I find someone foolish enough to take the job. After that, I will just run the software and server teams.
Okay.
So
I'm okay with that.
I have something.
I mean, he just needs to find the right guy, right?
Yeah, so Ian, I have something on that too.
That will take a while.
But if
it might take forever.
But if Elon really wants to piss everyone off in social media, he'll bring in all the content. He'll find a way to bring in long form and short form, video and written. And then what he'll turn around and do is give, 60, 70% or whatever amount he can give to the content creators. That all of a sudden that could basically destroy Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat. All those guys will be screwed, and all the content creators will come over. So to me, that's the way to just completely destroy that Web2 monopoly, is to just flip this whole ad model. And maybe he has to charge a fee to where for everybody to use it and things like that. But I think that's what's ultimately going to happen is when the content creators get the majority of the ad revenue, or he starts, doing different things like that really compensate people and pull them off those channels.
Well, as someone who had 250 million impressions last month, thanks largely to interactions with Musk, that would be interesting to see. But a lot of us are on there just not because of the monetization, because of the financial opportunities. But I know I'm on it because I'm trying to advance my cause and our movement and protect the Republic and support Judicial Watch. So I'm happy to be able to do that. So I'm going to try to bring this to a close. Kim and Ian and Steve and Sphinx and Saeed, thank you for joining us, and thank you, Catskill, for popping in at the last minute as well. I'm glad we were able to get it to work. I'm wondering, Kim, if there's a overseas problem with Spaces as well, now that we see that we had issues with you. And, Tara was here in the United States, so that shouldn't have been an issue. So I'm glad this was able to stabilize enough for us to have a good discussion here. So
I think it was very, very good that we put you in as the host because they are too scared to touch you.
You're an American, so they can't fuck with you. Yeah.
We'll see. I'm very intimidating, I understand. Well, thank you very much, everyone. And, everyone who's listening, track this group. Any one of us could be hosting Spaces at any time. And so stay tuned and stay involved. Thank you very much.
Good job, Tom. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, you guys. Bye.
Bye.